दिन रात दौड़ती इस दुनिया में, क्या तुम्हें अपनी परवाह भी है? औरों की खुशी में खुश हो तुम, क्या इससे ज्यादा कुछ चाह भी है? नम आँखों की मुस्कान हो, तप त्याग की पहचान हो, उम्मीदें हो सबकी दिलासे हो तुम। खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम, खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम। जो वक्त तुम्हारा हिस्सा था शायद पल उसका जिया नहीं, जो ख्वाब तुम्हारा किस्सा था छूटा तो शिकवा किया नहीं। तुमने ही दी रिश्तों को धड़कने, तुमने ही की हर सभी उलझने, हर नफ्स की रफ्तार तुम, हमदर्द लगे हर बार तुम, ज़मीं के फरिश्ते दुआ से हो तुम। खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम, खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम, खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम, खुदा तो नहीं पर खुदा से हो तुम।
Nope. Yep. 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 Nope. Yep.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. D.S. Meena, Chief Organizing Secretary of this webinar, Head Department of Veterinary Medicine, PGI VR Jaipur. On behalf of the Veterinary Internal and Preventive Medicine Society and Department of Veterinary Medicine, PGI VR Jaipur, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all in this prestigious webinar. We thanks to all of you from giving sparkling time from your busy schedule and joining us for this event. We would like to extend a winsome welcome to our today's chief guest, Professor Dr. Vishnu Sarma ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Rajasthan University of Veterinary and Animal Science, Rajubas, Bikaner, Rajasthan. Friends, our Honorable Vice Chancellor is a renowned academician, excellent administrator. He is always keeping profession on top. He is a member of many national and international committees related to the veterinary and animal sciences. He is a visionary famed of the profession. In his able leadership, our 1 decade-old university, Rajubas, is growing fastly. I again extend my gratitude and heartily welcome to you, Honorable Vice Chancellor Rajubas, Professor Vishnu Sarma sir. Friends, I am excited to introduce and offering a gladsome welcome to our today's respected speaker, a renowned clinician, former dean and faculty and director instructions, MAPSU Nagpur, Professor Dr. A. Sama sir. Respected speaker of today's webinar, he will deliver his ideas on metabolic diseases of importance in dairy animals. It is a very relevant and useful topic for veterinarians, especially for clinicians. I extend my genial welcome to you, Speaker Sir. I extend my friendly welcome to respected Dr. Ashok Kumar, General Secretary VIPM, Dr. S.K. Rawal, Vice President VIPM, Dr. Mukesh Kumar Srivastav, Dr. Nilesh Sharma, Executive Secretary, Dr. M.F. Siddiqui, Joint General Secretary, and Dr. Manoj Kumar Gupta, Treasurer of VIPM. I am welcome to all the executive committee members of the VIPM. I also extend cheerful welcome to the web coordinators of the VIPM, especially Dr. Nitin Bhatia from Intas Animal Health, Dr. Nilesh Sindhu and Dr. Sudhir Mehta. Friends, Intas Animal Health is our knowledge partner. I also extend my massive welcome to my colleagues of the PGIVR, Jaipur, Rajubas, Bikaner, and faculties of the different universities and all the respected participants from all corners of the country. I also welcome my colleague Dr. Rashmi Singh, Assistant Professor Veterinary Medicine, PGIVR, Jaipur, as the organizing secretary of this webinar. I hope all of you enjoy the session. I welcome friends. Now to kick-start the event, I welcome and request to the respected chairman and Dean PGIVR Jaipur, Professor Dr. Sanjita Sarma ma'am, for few words. Professor Sanjita Sarma ma'am, please.
So thank you very much, Dr. Dharam Singh. Am I audible?
Yeah, please.
So first of all, I thank very much to this Veterinary Internal Preventive Medicine Society for giving us opportunity to host this webinar. So thanks from on behalf of PGIVR. And I'm very much thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Vishnu Sarma sir. In spite of his busy schedule, we all know that he is very busy during this time, but even then, he just spared some time for us and he is with us. So, sir, welcome you and thank you very much, sir, for providing your valuable time to us. All the participants, I'm thanking you, I'm welcoming you on behalf of PGIVR Jaipur. PGIVR first I just want to introduce myself. Means I want to introduce Postgraduate Institute of Veterinary Education and Research. It is Constituent College of Rajuvas and situated at Jaipur city. This college is having all the three, although name denotes that may be misleading that it is only graduate institute, but we also have undergraduate system also. Initially it is started with the post-graduation system, but later on undergraduate system is also here with us. And fortunately our first batch is coming out and our college is also having this Schedule 1 status. So now it is full-fledged, although budding, but we have each and every strata with us. Today's webinar, if I come to the today's webinar, first of all, I am thankful to the society, then I am also thankful to our patron of this society, Professor A.K. Gehlot sir, all the delegates who are with us. Definitely it will be very, very useful for you all, because the topic of this today's webinar is very much relevant with the present scenario. We all know that after this is the period of COVID, but post-COVID, we know that everybody is coming to their home again. Everybody is just moving towards their roots, and they are joining this. Their inclination is towards the animal husbandry, farming system, and we all know that when in the animal farming system, what is the main feature is that if we want any economic farming, then we have to be we have to just take care of or I can say major aspect is animal nutrition. Out of 100 pennies, if we just look into the expenditure, then it goes up to 70% towards the nutrition, and it is the game of the nutrition. If management of nutrition is slightly disturbed, we all know that today's topic is very much relevant with this management of nutrients. If management of nutrients disturbs, then it disturbs the metabolic system of the animal, it disturbs the whole economy of the animal. So today our very eminent scientist, very eminent learned speaker is with us. So I welcome Dr. A. Samad, Professor A. Samad, who is learned speaker, and I hope that you all will enjoy this. So again, I welcome Professor Samad, and I just thanks this INTAS Animal Health System also, because they are knowledge partner of this webinar. So now I welcome everybody to enjoy this webinar, and I hope that you will definitely benefited with this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now I request to our chief guest, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, Professor Vishnu Sharma ji, for opening remarks, please. VC, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Dharam Singh. First of all, I understand that Rajuvas is one of the partners, Duasu is another partner, or INTAS is another partner. Maybe it's a joint initiative, and the society, it is again VIPM, that is also a partner. So first of all, on behalf of on Rajuvas as a partner of this joint initiative, a very good afternoon to one and all, delegates, members of the VIPM, members of various professional societies, veterinarians, Dr. Ashok, I was looking at him, Dr. Samad, Dr. Nitin Bhatia, Professor A.K. Gehlot, probably he will join later, and all others. It's a good time that we are at least interacting frequently in post-COVID, in due to this COVID era. This series of webinars have been erupted, and we are interacting frequently maybe on small topics, but this is giving a good sensitization to the society, and everybody is able to harness some benefit out of this short time as per his or her convenience. So this is a very good outcome which has been visibly appreciated by many, this initiative of webinars. And in this, I appreciate the role of INTAS, who have taken a lead to initiate a series of webinars in this veterinary medicine or veterinary science, various subjects of the veterinary science. Dear friends, veterinary profession is at crossroad at presently. Why at crossroad? Because we were for last many years, we were not having our constituent body, which has recently been formed as Veterinary Council of India. Various professionals and the young professionals and the senior professionals, they all are being gathered at various forums and then discussing about the potential of our profession. But we were not able to showcase to the society the real worth and the real potential of the veterinary profession. In the post-COVID era, when the society requires to gain good health through better immunity and better protection, at that time, animal products are going to play a major role to boost the immunity of the society. And for that, everybody is looking towards the veterinarian and the veterinary profession. We should understand this potential. We should have some capacity development, which is, this webinar is definitely one of the way of developing the capacity and communicating to the masses of the veterinarians that we should realize our worth, that how we can address to the need of the society. Then and then we will be able to harness the benefit from the policy makers, from the politicians, from the system, from the government and from the masses. Only and only if we will be able to fulfill and come up to the promises what the society expects from us. So the topic which has been chosen, metabolic diseases of importance in dairy animals. Being animal nutritionist, the metabolic diseases is one of the most important aspect of the dairy animal. Largely, apart from the infectious diseases, which really the veterinary medicine people are treating, the metabolic diseases are mainly the part of the animal nutrition or the animal nutritionist. But it's a small segment. Veterinary science is a small segment, and the medicine people, the nutrition people, the production people, all we should remain in unity, and we should devise some of the formulations, some of the recommendations by discussing among the cross disciplines, so that an holistic viewpoint can come up while formulating the recommendations. The clinicians are trained only for the clinicians. The animal nutritionists are trained for the clinical nutrition, where they are going to recommend the preventive or the dietary guidelines. You should also read the mind of the animal nutritionist, and animal nutritionists should also try to read the mind of the clinicians. And then, by crossing the disciplines, by joining the disciplines, by understanding the priorities of the discipline, we will be able to formulate the good recommendations. With that, I hope that the topic has been chosen is very pertinent and very important, and my all wishes to all the fellow veterinarians, to the office bearers of the society, INTAS, that definitely we will synthesize some of the fruitful recommendations out of this webinar, and those recommendations should be synthesized in a way that they can be practically implemented at the field level by the field veterinarian. With this, I am thankful to Dean PGIVR, to the society, to INTAS that they have chosen me to be on the board, and I am able to share some of my ideas with my fellow veterinarians. Very all the best to all of you. Best wishes. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. All ready, sir. Okay. I welcome you all, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, all other dignitaries, the officials of INTAS, and all the delegate friends. I'll try to focus on three different diseases, and what I am going to do is give you an update of what are new developments that have taken place in these three diseases, rather than repeating what you already know. I'd like to blend my lecture with some of my own research which I have done in this area, as well as the experience, so that I would be able to convey the 3 or 4 messages which I would like to do today. See, probably you may not be knowing that when I applied for Commonwealth Scholarship, I did a deliberate mistake, and the mistake was there were only 3 seats for veterinary science, and there were 12 seats for chemistry, biochemistry. So I decided to apply in chemistry and biochemistry, and then fortunately I was selected. And after selection, then became the problem that Commonwealth wanted that since I have been given a post in chemistry, biochemistry, I should join a chemistry, biochemistry department and do my PhD in that subject. Whereas I was not inclined, because I was insisting that since I am from veterinary science and from veterinary medicine, I would like to go to a veterinary school and would like to do in veterinary medicine. So somehow, out of some flexibility, they found out a way out, and the way out was that I would be doing all my coursework in veterinary medicine in the Ontario Veterinary College, and would have one adjunct professor from Department of Chemistry, and then most of my part of research I will be spending with them in the chemistry department. And then what happened in the chemistry department, when I joined there, the professor asked me, what is your chemistry background? And as you all know, we do chemistry only up to 12th standard, and after that, hardly we have the basic understanding of the chemistry. So then he asked me to start reading from 8th standard, because I would also be required to teach organic chemistry to undergraduate students. I was really frightened, but then I had to really work very hard and acquired the basic understanding of chemistry and how it can be applied. So you'll find that most of my later research is also based on my chemical and biochemistry understanding. So I have a lot of chemistry, a lot of biochemistry into my research program. So I would also be narrating. So how I look at the diseases from chemistry point of view, I look at drugs and feed and ingredients from chemistry point of view, from metabolic pathways point of view, and those are some of the important things which I would like to convey to you today. So there are 3 diseases which I have chosen from as per the priority: ketosis, phosphorus deficiency or hypophosphatemia, and milk fever. Okay. Now don't be scared. I've just given some chemical structures here, because we always talk of rumen, and rumen volatile fatty acids are produced, and these volatile fatty acids are actually 3 carbon compounds, and then there are a lot of interchanges between these volatile fatty acids, and then they are absorbed. And so this is a simple pathway which I would like to explain to you in brief, because this is a basic understanding. If you have this understanding, then probably your way of looking at ketosis will be slightly different. And as Honorable Vice Chancellor has rightly pointed out, that you have to look at from nutrition point also. Whenever you talk of metabolic and deficiency disease, then you'll have to look at the nutrition part, because because treatment you're going to give only for a temporary support. But if it is a nutritional problem, unless and until you are correcting nutrition, you are not going to get a long-term solution. So you can see I have given beta hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetoacetyl. This is converted into acetyl coenzyme A. Then this is the propionate. Now these are the 3 volatile fatty acids, or short chain fatty acids. They are called as these short chain fatty acids are produced, and these can be absorbed through rumen epithelium. It is not necessary that it would go only into the intestine and will get absorbed. A lot of it can be absorbed from rumen epithelium. Out of this, you can see beta hydroxybutyrate is the one which is very difficult, because beta hydroxybutyrate has got there are the requirement of enzymes for conversion of beta hydroxybutyrate has got lot of limitations. And it has been told to you in your nutrition classes as well as physiology classes that when the carbohydrates are digested, you produce 3 different types of short chain fatty acids: propionate, then acetate or acetoacetate, and then butyrate. Now propionate is the one which is glucose precursor, whereas beta hydroxybutyrate and acetate, they have interconvertibility, and whenever these are found, they will be activated through acetyl through a pathway which is called coenzyme A driven pathway, and there is an enzyme called acyl coenzyme A transferase, and this will activate. So this is something which you should understand, that all these acetate, acetoacetate, beta hydroxybutyrate, as well as all the long chain fatty acids, these are all metabolized only when they are acylated or esterified. We call it esterification. And esterification means you are attaching this coenzyme A factor to it, and this coenzyme A factor, when it is attached, it becomes soluble. Otherwise, you all know that fatty acids are not soluble. So if it is not soluble in water, it will not be entering into the cytosolic pathway. Cytosol is mostly aqueous. So the pathogenesis pathway in case of ketosis is that it is because of insufficient propionic acid production. Because you need propionate, because it's a precursor of glucose, and this glucose is required because animal has recently parturated, and its requirement of glucose has increased. But there is also a problem that feed intake is reduced because the cow has, or the buffalo has gone through the trauma of calving, and that trauma and calving stress is very high. Level of cortisol at that point of time is quite high. And that directly affects the feed intake. So you need more energy, but the animal cannot eat more, and because of that, you have less of energy, and this less of energy. But the udder is under the influence of prolactin, under the influence of several other hormones, and the synthesis of milk is mostly hormone driven. So what body does is it starts mobilizing the body's fat, and that body's fat gets metabolized, convert that into ketone bodies, and these ketone bodies then become the source of energy. And then when these ketone bodies become very high concentration, then they are excreted in urine and they have the toxic effects. So that is how the ketosis happen. So normal course also, the acetate, acetyl coenzyme A, this butyrate, these are all source of energy for cow. These are all present in blood, and these are all also excreted in some amount in urine. But when their production is very high because of mobilization of fat, then you have lots of ketone bodies that are produced. So there are 2 types of ketosis: type 1 ketosis and type 2 ketosis. And clinicians, if you can understand this, then probably treatment becomes extremely easy. Now, type 1 ketosis is the one which occurs closer to peak yield. Okay, so animal has calved, animal has started slowly increasing, come to peak, say around 21 days to 45 days. And because of peak, the mobilization, although there is a peak, but mobilization of energy is not proper, and therefore the body fat is metabolized and more ketone bodies are produced. So that is called as type 1 ketosis. Whereas type 2 ketosis occurs immediately postpartum between 5 to 21 days and mostly, within first week. And this type 2 ketosis is basically because if you have a cow which has been given high amount of diet, high energy density diet during the dry period, its body condition score is high because during pregnancy, the feed conversion ratio is very high. And if you're giving a lot of energy, it is converted into fat. And this fat is in the form of fatty acid. Now, as I have told you earlier, that fatty acids, if these are to be transported across the cell membrane, if these are to be utilized, they need to be esterified, and with occasion you need a metabolic pathway. And if the fatty acid is concentration is very high and coenzyme A concentration is less, so there is no esterification, and then this cannot go into triglycerol, get esterified into triglycerol, and therefore you have these fatty acids which are accumulated in liver, and that fatty liver is the cause of ketone bodies, because then these are the fatty acids which will be creating problems. And and here mostly it is because of the insulin problem, insulin refractivity. So the basic difference between type 1 ketosis and type 2 ketosis is, in case of type 1 ketosis you have hypoglycemia, whereas in case of type 2 ketosis you have hyperglycemia, because that is the problem of insulin. So this is the basic difference. If you understand this, then you know how the treatment also, treatment approach is also going to be slightly different. Now, as I have told you, body condition score is very important to avoid, fatty liver syndrome. And this syndrome we find very high in case of buffaloes, because buffaloes are very high converter of fiber into fat, and therefore during the dry period when animals are advanced pregnant, if you give them a lot of feed, they go into a very high body condition score. This is how generally I would do body condition scoring of cows at the time of calving. And this is if the cow is in between these, where the amount of fat and the amount of muscle on the back is so high that when you are standing on the backside and when you are looking at the back, you see it as a linear. Okay, then we say that it is between 3 to 4. So if the body condition score is above 3.75, these are the cows which are likely to suffer from the problem. This is again, I've just tried to focus again, giving you two graphs that most of the animals, high yielding cows as well as buffaloes, will have this problem, and therefore the management of nutrition at the time of transition from dry cow to a peak yield stage is extremely important. And that is what we need to teach to our farmers, that this is the period if you will focus, then you will reach to the peak yield, and then you will be able to reap the the right kind of productivity and the genetic value of the cow or the buffalo. Feeding at that stage is extremely important. As I show you here, this is the lactation energy which is required. You can see immediately after parturition, the energy required for lactation is very high, whereas the net energy which is available from the feed is going up very slowly, because there is a problem of intake of dry matter. So ensuring that there is enough of dry matter intake, good feed, good amount of energy is being fed to the animal immediately after calving, and in some cases slightly 1 week before calving is a better strategy to avoid ketosis problems. I'm not going to detail of clinical presentation, because you all know that there are two forms. One is wasting form and neurological form. So I'll not go into that detail. Now I come to diagnostic test. And here I would like to give you two important messages. The first message is, as I have told you earlier, that ketone bodies are also normally found in urine of cows and buffaloes, whereas in human, ketone bodies will never be found unless and until there is ketonuria in urine. So therefore, those kits that are available, that dipstick kits that are available for ketone estimation for human is not suitable for animal, because we'll get 99% animals will be showing ketone positive, but they may not be beyond that threshold. So that is message number one. Number two message, in case of buffaloes, you have more of beta hydroxybutyrate, whereas Rothera's test, which we generally do, is good for acetate and acetoacetate, and it cannot detect the beta hydroxybutyrate. So therefore, if you are doing this in buffalo, it is very likely that if the urine is having high hydroxybutyrate content, then probably you will not be able to correctly detect. Then number three diagnostic test which we generally do is glucose estimation. Again, for glucose estimation, there are enough of literature available saying that glucose level to diagnose ketosis in case of ruminant is not a very sensitive and specific test, and that has to be avoided. So the best test which is gold standard is beta hydroxybutyrate. But for beta hydroxybutyrate, your normal urine test won't work. There are kits available wherein you can do beta hydroxybutyrate in blood. So that is the difference you should keep in mind. Then treatment. Now again, in treatment, as I have told you earlier, in case of ketosis, treatment will take care of immediate problem, but it's not a permanent solution. For example, we give IV administration of 500 ml of 50% dextrose. So you can imagine, how much glucose you are giving. And I'm just trying to show here that 180 gram of glucose, if you are injecting in the body, it's only going to give you 2.8 megajoules of energy. Whereas a cow which is giving 20 liters of milk for maintenance as well as for its milk production will require 220 megajoule. So even if you are administering lot of 50% dextrose, you are not meeting this requirement. So you may tide over the immediate crisis, but you have to look at the long-term solution. Then you can also add certain vitamin B complex and other things. And one more point to note here is 50% dextrose is hyperosmotic, and therefore while giving intravenous you have to be very careful that it doesn't go perivascular, otherwise it will cause problems. Another important drug which can be administered is glucocorticoids, including dexamethasone. This can be given 5 to 20 milligram per dose. You may have to repeat it for 2 to 3 days. But there is one more point you must remember. Whenever dexamethasone or any glucocorticoid is given for ketosis, you need to tell the farmer that there would be temporarily some reduction in milk yield. Because of this nexus of corticosteroid, glucocorticosteroid, it will suppress, and then after 3 or 4 days, the animal will again come back to the milk, and the loss which has happened for 3 to 4 days because of dexamethasone, that will be met, because then the animal will come into productivity. Another point you have to remember here is that you have to supplement some starchy feed, because the starchy feed will be giving immediate energy, because some of the starch will be converted into the glucogenic kind of volatile fatty acids. Some starch can pass to the intestine and get digested for direct direct glucose absorption. So this will take care of. So what I usually do in such cases, I give 50% dextrose, say 2 liters or 3 liters, followed by dexamethasone injection, and then I ask the farmer to start, say maize, crushed maize, or crushed jawar, 1 or 2 kg to be given at least for a week, and then look at the nutritional formulation, look at how much energy is being given, whether that energy is really correct or not. Another treatment which is generally suggested is propylene glycol, which is very expensive. And one of the problem with propylene glycol is it also suppresses appetite. So if you're giving it for 1 or 2 days, it's fine, but giving more than 400 gram and giving it repeatedly results in suppression of appetite, and we don't want that. In case of type 2 ketosis, generally insulin is administered, because I have said there is hyperglycemia. So you have to give 150 to 200 international unit per day. You have to repeat it for 3 to 4 days. And generally, because we don't know how much is the glucose level, so therefore whenever you give insulin, also keep 50% or 25% dextrose injection ready, And I usually prefer both injections to be given simultaneously. I start the IV glucose injection, and I also give insulin injection, so that there is no hypoglycemia because of my administration. Maintaining and promoting feed intake is important, and there are lots of papers which suggest that the important point is neutral fiber is important. If neutral fiber is very high in the feed, then that suppresses appetite. So mostly the nutritionist will tell you that immediately after parturition, the source of carbohydrate should be predominantly from starchy feed. And after 45 days or 50 days, you can slowly shift to non-starchy carbohydrate, such as crude fiber and other sources of carbohydrate. So that is how usually ketosis can be taken care of. As I have said, NDF is important. Neutral detergent fiber is important, and as you have high neutral detergent fiber, these appetite will be suppressed. So generally, I look at the formulation and suggest that after parturition, don't go beyond 25% of NDF, and then you can calculate. So I have also given a formula here where you can calculate the energy requirement very easily. For example, if there is a cow which is 500 kg weight, and if you want to ensure dry matter intake at 2.5, and then subsequently increase it to 3.2, and with a protein percentage in the feed of is 18 to 20%, and NDF less than 33%, you have to give a maintenance energy of 54 megajoule. And for milk, you have to give around 5.7 to 5.8 megajoule per liter of milk. So calculate how much milk is expected, and accordingly you can do a feed formulation. Now I come to the second disease, hypophosphatemia. Again here, there are two types of syndromes which we generally see. Chronic phosphorus deficiency leading to hypophosphatemia, where you have osteodystrophies, you have problems related with bones, then you have pica and others, and there is another phosphorus deficiency which occurs when the phosphorus levels is very low, that is called as phosphorus deficiency hemoglobia. So I would be touching on both, and especially adding into what is new in it. Now I have done a lot of research on phosphorus deficiency hemoglobinuria. I spent nearly 5-6 years on this topic, and I have close association with INTAS. When I was doing this kind of study, because then Dr. Mamtani used to visit the department, and we used to have very long chat on what I am doing, and he used to be very keen in understanding how I am applying my chemistry knowledge to elucidate the pathogenesis, the pathways of different diseases. So I had worked on the pathogenesis of this phosphorus deficiency hemoglobinuria, and in nutshell, I'll tell you what was the finding. The finding was that inorganic phosphorus is important for uptake of glucose in the RBCs. Now erythrocytes are very specialized cells because they don't have nucleus, and therefore for their energy requirement, they depend only on glucose. And this glucose uptake through hexokinase enzyme is dependent on how much inorganic phosphorus is present outside, because this hexokinase, for getting activated, has to be converted into phosphohexokinase. Then there is a flip-flop and glucose is taken inside, and glucose then will be metabolized and form an ATP, and this ATP is the energy for RBCs. So net result is, when you don't have inorganic phosphorus, the uptake of glucose is less, and therefore the ATP content goes down. And then subsequently we found that it is not only the RBCs, but entire cellular, if you look at all these cells, the total phosphorus goes down, because we used to do phosphorus in phospholipid, phosphorus in cytosol, phospholipids in cell membrane, phospholipid outside. So it drastically goes down, and our finding is probably the low levels of inorganic phosphorus which you find is a very late symptom, whereas earlier the cellular phosphates go down very rapidly. And then what happens when ATP is less? These cells, you remember, they are having 5 micron size, more than 5 micron, and there are capillaries which are 1 micron or less than 1 micron. So therefore, when these RBCs, have to pass through those capillaries, because they are carrying oxygen, so they have to pass through these capillaries, go to the tissues. So when they are passing through those capillaries, they have to be flexible. They have to transform their shape to the capillary size, and once they come out, then they reassume that's it. I'll give you an analogy of a air bubble, which you are passing through a very narrow tube. So when you pass that, it becomes elliptical, comes out, and then it becomes again rounded. So same thing happens here. And for that shape transformation, you need ATP. And if ATP is less, it cannot, it is no more flexible, and therefore it starts, rupturing, and you get hemoglobinuria. So this is one of the tests which is done, where you can see that in case of healthy animals, the fluorescence, anisotropic fluorescence is low, whereas when the RBCs are phosphorus deficient, it becomes very high, and this is because of the hemolysis, which is happening because of the the problem in shape change. So this is how I would explain that these RBCs will become elliptical. There is also one more pathognomic sign in case of hypophosphatemia, which a good laboratory technician or laboratory pathologist will not miss. That is called as Heinz bodies. So in human also there is a disease called Heinz body anemia. One of the causes for that is also phosphorus deficiency, especially in hyperalimentation cases where there is no enteric feeding and lot of parenteral feeding is taking place. In those cases also there is what is called as rigid anemia because of these Heinz bodies. So this Heinz bodies also is important for resolution, because if you are treating and if you are not able to resolve these Heinz bodies, then these RBCs will still continue to be extra phagocytosis from extravascular spaces, and there will be hemolytic anemia. Then I come to treatment. Now, as I have said, in hypophosphatemia, the problem is deficiency of inorganic phosphorus. So therefore, the standard treatment is that you have to give inorganic phosphates, and when you give inorganic phosphates, you replenish deficient phosphorus. There is also another product that is available which people have been using. Those are organic phosphate, organic phosphonates or organic phosphates, such as toldim phos or butyrophosphone. These are the drugs available under various trade name, and one of the important trade name known to you is tonophosphone. When I was working on developing new therapeutic approaches, I developed an in vitro model, and then that was the first time I found out that tonophosphone or this toldim-phos was not working. And then I tried to contact the company to find out what exactly is happening, and then I tried to get some literature on the pharmacopoeia of this drug. But I could not get after nearly 6-7 months I contacted my contacts in Europe, and they could send me one pharmacopoeia copy of this drug, and it very clearly said that this particular drug is excreted in urine 100% as it is. Okay, no change. Total, it is excreted in urine. Number 2 point, it was said that it is phosphonate, and these phosphonate compounds is having double bond. Oxygen phosphorus is in double bond, and there is no enzyme in mammalian system which can cleave this double bond. There is only one marine bacteria which can cleave this bond, and unless this bond is cleaved, this phosphorus will not be available for metabolization. So and that is the reason why 100% of this drug was excreted in urine. And then same is also happening with butyrophosphone. Then I went back and then talked to them. I said, this is something which is extremely important. You are suggesting that this is to be used in hypophosphatemia, but the literature suggests that this bond cannot be broken. So you are not going to have phosphorus available. Number 2, we are giving only in few milligram, 220 milligram of phosphorus we are giving through the total dose of 15 ml or 20 ml, which is very peanuts. Where this milligram will go, you have to give 30 gram or 60 gram of sodium acid phosphate. So compared to that, it is just nothing. And then I chanced upon MSD vet manual, and look at what MSD manual says. MSD manual says there's this hypophosphite or phosphinate, hypophosphite or organic phosphorus compounds such as butophosphone or toldim-phos are often used to supplement phosphorus intravenously, frequently in combination with calcium, magnesium, and other minerals. However, these phosphorus compounds are not suitable to correct hypophosphatemia because mammals are unable to convert phosphite or other above mentioned organic compounds into phosphate, and so do not contribute to the biologically active plasma pool. Even when organic phosphate compounds are usable metabolized, pharmaceutical product containing organic phosphate compounds administered at the labeled dose does not provide enough phosphorus to cover serum phosphorus depletion, which would be a primary indication of IV treatment. So whatever I had pointed, that was accepted later on, and this was the correction that was made into the veterinary manual. But unfortunately, I find that there are a lot of companies which are marketing this kind of toldim-phos kind of product, but still continue to maintain that this is to be administered in case of hypophosphatemia. As a source of phosphorus is absolutely incorrect. Is not supported from the biochemistry point of view as well as from the metabolic point of view. And therefore, for prevention, what actually treatment we should give, because that was the time when I was working on alternate formulation, and I was fortunate that Dr. Mamtani got interested in what I was doing, and Entas is having a product called Novizac. This Novizac is a buffered phosphorus, because when I was working, I found out that for ionization of phosphorus, you need to have a correct pKa. If you just take sodium acid phosphate, dissolve in 5% dextrose, you have a pH of 3.2 and only 1 pKa you have achieved. So only 1/3 of phosphorus is ionized. Whereas if you buffer it and go to 7.2 or 7.4 pH and above, then you have 2 to 2.5 phosphorus will be ionized. So availability of phosphorus is going to be very high. And therefore, we developed, in collaboration with Entas, we developed that Novizac, which is the first buffered phosphorus, which will not lead to any acidosis after administration, was developed. And then later on, you have to, in case of hypophosphatemia, since it's a chronic deficiency, you have to supplement phosphorus. And in supplementation of phosphorus also, you have to remember what source of phosphorus you are using as supplementation, what is its bioavailability. That is extremely important to understand. At every point, a clinician, while looking at any drug, should understand what is its molecular structure. Is it bioavailable? How much is bioavailable? Is it metabolized? Does it reach to the site, where it is needed? So these are all important critical questions to ask, and don't depend on companies, because I find there are lots of companies which will not give you all these, correct information, and number of times, you find that the drugs that are brought to you is not really having much rationale to explain. So as a clinician, you need to ask this kind of questions. As far as phosphorus is concerned, phosphorus bioavailability is a very big question. So therefore, when you are using mineral mixture, you need to understand what is the source of phosphorus, number one. Now, when you understand the source of phosphorus, also understand that suppose if I am using calcium chloride or some other phosphorus compound like dicalcium phosphate, then I should know what is the molecular weight, and 1 mole of that compound is going to give you 1 mole of phosphorus. So therefore, if molecular weight of the compound is say 500, then in that case, and if it is having only 1 phosphorus mole, so that 500 gram is going to give me only 31 gram of phosphorus. And out of that 31 gram of phosphorus, how much is going to be bioavailable? These are the questions which are extremely important. Otherwise, blindly you would keep on giving minerals without much result. Now I'll come to the third disease, milk fever. Here also again I would not go into much details, because we all know about milk fever symptoms and other things. I don't think any good clinician is going to miss out on the diagnosis. Sometimes when there is a problem, what I do, I also do blood clotting, because when serum calcium level is low, say below 6 milligram per deciliter, the clotting time is increased. So this is one of the tests, which you can very rapidly perform. Just take a while, and in that you take 5 ml of blood and just keep it for 10-12 minutes. If it doesn't clot, then there is a clotting problem. Put 1 drop of calcium borogluconate. If it clots, then it's problem of calcium, and you can very happily start giving calcium injection. Now again, in calcium also there are 2 or 3 different kinds of treatment available. One is calcium borogluconate. Calcium borogluconate is a very good compound, because calcium borogluconate becomes 100% ionized at the blood pH. So therefore, when you are giving it intravenously or in the body subcutaneous, 100% of this calcium gluconate will be absorbed and calcium will be available from it. The second point which the vets should remember, clinicians should remember, is that in case of milk fever, rapidity with which you will start treatment is extremely important. If you delay it by 12 hours, then you are going to lose the cow, or you are going to lose the buffalo, because it is sitting in sternal or lateral recumbency, and that will create lots of problems, the muscle problem as well as the neurological problem. So speed at which you are reaching out is important. Number 2, suppose you are not able to reach, you'll have to advise the farmer to start at least giving oral calcium. Now there is a strategy which is followed in Europe as well as in Canada, that immediately after calving, the farmers are advised to give a calcium dose, and basically it is a dicatonic calcium, because it's already in cationic form, it's in ionized form, so its absorption through rumen is high. So as a preventive strategy, dicatonic calcium to be administered immediately after parturition, and then maybe after 2 hours again 1 more dose, and another 2 hours 1 more dose is given. And still, if there is a problem, then intravenous injection can be given. Another issue which you can also advise to farmer, if he is able to give intramuscular, or if you have a paravet who is nearby, you can ask him to give intramuscular dicatonic calcium, like Sancalvet, those kind of drugs that are available, because this will also be absorbed rapidly. But again, problem in case of hypocalcemia is that in third phase there is perivascular failure. So that means the venous return, and that's why in milk fever cases, when you touch extremities, it is cold, skin is cold, because blood supply is less, and if blood supply is less, venous return is also less. So therefore, if you're giving any injection, intramuscular or subcut, the absorption is going to be problem there. So therefore, giving it intravenously is important. Don't give too much of calcium. I have seen people having holding Olympic records of giving calcium intravenously. Somebody said, I have given to one case 21 injection, 22 injection. It doesn't serve any purpose. So you need to if the animal is going to respond to calcium, usually it responds even with half of you have already administered. And as soon as you finish half of the administration, animal will immediately get up and urinate. In that case, what I usually do is I give only half intravenous and half I give subcut, so that there is a delayed absorption. So even if calcium ionized form is excreted in urine, there is continuous availability of calcium. This calcium you are giving is not a substitute for calcium, because animal is not having calcium deficiency. It is temporary defect of mobilization, and therefore you have triggered this, and with triggering, the calcium mobilization will start happening, and then you will be having normal metabolism of calcium will start. Another point which I would like to mention again here is one more compound which is very commonly used by us, calcium magnesium borogluconate. Now, as I have told you, calcium borogluconate is a very good compound, because it gets ionized in blood pH very fast. Okay, and therefore 100% it is available. But these companies also claim that their source is also source of phosphorus, and that is why they claim that we are giving calcium, magnesium as well as phosphorus, which is incorrect. That I'll explain to you again. It gives calcium and magnesium, that is fine, but it cannot give phosphorus, for the same reason which I have explained to earlier, that what they give here is magnesium hypophosphite, and magnesium hypophosphite has got this kind of structure where between oxygen and phosphorus there is double bond, and this double bond cannot be broken. So therefore, this phosphorus is not going to be available. So therefore, if you are giving magnesium hypophosphite, the magnesium level will increase definitely, and there are a number of reports published saying that whenever magnesium hypophosphite is given, there is increase in magnesium level. But the same papers also say that phosphorus levels are not increased. So we need to point out to these companies that in your literature, please do mention that these kind of products will give only calcium and magnesium, and please do not mention phosphorus. Whereas the papers now suggest, I have gone through some papers 2017 to 2020, especially in Australia as well as in Canada and USA, where there is a problem of Down's cow, Down's syndrome, Downer's cow syndrome. They have come up with a strategy where they say that Downer's cow syndrome is more because of phosphorus deficiency. These are the cows which were also having phosphorus related problems, chronic problems, and that's why they are having this weakness in the muscles and weakness to stand up, skeletal weakness we call it. So there the strategy they say is that you give first injection of calcium, like calcium borogluconate or calcium magnesium borogluconate. I prefer calcium magnesium borogluconate for simple reason that it is also having magnesium, so that the problem related with calcium, like cardiac fibrillation, can be minimized if you have magnesium in it. So I always prefer giving calcium magnesium borogluconate intravenously, even if I know that it is a problem related with calcium. And after that also, if animal is not getting up, then give after 4 to 5 hours sodium phosphate injection like Novizet, and then you find that lot of these cases will respond. Because you are administering phosphorus which is in highly ionizable form and in metabolizable form. So that is what is the strategy in Downer's cow as well as in milk fever people are following. Now, as far as prevention of milk fever is concerned, here again you have to remember that this is the defect in calcium mobilization and not calcium deficiency. Now, most of the fodder and feed are rich in calcium, and we always are making a mistake. We give more importance to calcium in our nutrition, whereas in case of ruminants it is phosphorus which is important, because all the fodders are not a good source of phosphorus, whereas all grains are good source of phosphorus. So when you look at poultry which is on phosphorus, they will not having phosphorus problem, they will have calcium related problems. Whereas in case of ruminants, where they are not having a lot of grains, so they won't have a lot of calcium related problems, but they would definitely have problems related with phosphorus. So you need to give more emphasis on phosphorus. So for preventing hypocalcemia or milk fever, the strategy is you give less calcium during dry period. So you have a mineral mixture where the decad is reversed, and then after parturition you again reverse you again reverse it. And if this is not really possible to do, where smallholder farmers cannot switch in dry period and then again switch after parturition, then at least what you can do is you can tell your farmers that as soon as there is parturition, or as soon as you see that there is synthesis of colostrum in udder, you give dicatonic calcium orally as a strategy, because many farmers after parturition do have a cocktail. They prepare a cocktail, add some ghee, some other material. There are people who will boil it, let them do whatever they are doing, but then tell them after that you add 50 ml of dicatonic calcium into it, mix it, and give it orally to the cow or the buffalo. That will take care of the problems related with availability of calcium immediately after parturition. So this is what I wanted to convey today. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, for INTAS giving me this opportunity. I must Dr. Nitin, I would like to Bhatia, I would like to tell him to convey my regards to Dr. Mamtani, because he had been very kind to me. We used to have a lot of discussion. I used to have good collaboration with INTAS, visited them several times, and when we developed this product, there were a lot of inputs which were given from all the sides. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir, I'm sharing the questions. There are a lot of questions have been asked.
And sir, almost questions are answered in your presentation. Here few questions I am sharing with you. One question from Dr. Karuna Bhati is how to diagnose subclinical metabolic disorders. Sir, how to diagnose subclinical metabolic disorders? Should I repeat the question? Am I audible to all?
Yeah. Rashmi, you're audible. It seems that Dr. Samad is having a little weak connection, so he's back. Yeah, sir.
Sir, question is this: how to diagnose subclinical metabolic disorders?
Sir, आप म्यूट पे हैं.
Subclinical metabolic disease, right?
Yes, sir. How to diagnose subclinical metabolic diseases?
Okay. What you see, in case of smallhold, it becomes slightly difficult. But I had tried this with many dairy cooperatives, and what I used to do was called as village level metabolic profiling. So I used to consider village as a herd because you'll find that mostly in a village the feeding practices are more or less similar. Because every farmer look at each other and they try to copy the leader farmer within the village. So about 75 to 80% uniformity you will get at the village level. So I used to do what is called as metabolic profiling. And in this metabolic profiling, you have to randomly select, and it's important. If you don't randomize and if you don't select animals randomly, because you are doing this metabolic profiling in around 20 to 21 animals only, and there you would like to have animals from different physiological states and nutritional states, and therefore giving weightage depending upon the population profile is important. And fortunately, in all those villages, I had advantage that I was having all those animals registered on a platform. I was having their physiological status, which was in real time being updated. So I used to do metabolic profiling, and based on metabolic profiling, we have also formulated feed. For example, Nitin might be knowing there is one Chitale dairy, which is very famous, in Sangli area. So depending upon this metabolic profiling, we talked with Godrej, and then we came up with a specialized feed, for that particular region. That was also the time when we came up with area-specific mineral mixture. So before NDDB took up this project, this was first time in Kolhapur. There was a conference where NDDB people were also there, and there we had presented our finding from Kolhapur district and Sangli district, saying that there is area, areas are different. For example, in Kolhapur, we were having some areas which were having calcium problem, but lots of areas were having phosphorus related problems. There were some which were not having selenium related problems. So these are all different. So there we suggested that we should have a specific, because India is such a big country. Even a state is such a big country. Agroclimatic conditions are different. Soil is different. So therefore, you have to come up with this kind of formulation. So for this, usually do either a major metabolic profiling or a minimum metabolic profiling. And to many dairy cooperatives where I am working with them, I always tell them to keep an eye on phosphorus, which is being made available through feed. If not going to blood, etc. At least the final feed which they are giving, randomly select from farmers, and then find out how much phosphorus is getting inside. And then based on that, we can find out whether there is problem related to phosphorus deficiency. So in my clinical practice, I do lot of work related with feed, looking at feed as an ingredient of health. I consider feed as a very important factor determining health of the animal and productivity of the animal. So we constantly keep get feed samples from farmers, have their energy level, and a lot of these micro level studies we have done, and we find that we cannot apply any general principle. In our case, you have to have a very micro level approach.
Thank you, sir.
And in metabolic profiling, I usually do hemoglobin PCV, then blood glucose, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium if it is available. Then NIFA is important, non-esterified fatty acid. So NIFA we do. So these are the tests which we usually do. And then after doing that, what I do is I take out mean plus minus standard error. This is important. You don't look at individual animals value. You have to have an average and standard error. If your standard error is more than twice, if your mean is and standard error is too much deviating, that will tell you that it's a problem which is related with few specific animals. Whereas if standard error and mean is quite uniform, it tells you it's a uniform problem. So that is how I approach I approach the feed formulation and nutrition related issues.
Okay, sir. Sir, second question is, why fever word is used in milk fever?
Oh,
Why?
I think I know this has been explained in one of the books written by one important author from UK 1920s 25s where I am not forgetting his name. There he's mentioned that in UK fever was an acronym used for disease.
Right, sir.
Okay, so milk related disease and not the typical hypothermia which we usually understand. So it was a milk related disease, so that's why it is called as milk fever.
Thank you, sir. Sir, next question is field strategy to control the metabolic diseases. What is field strategy to control metabolic diseases?
Well, as I have told you that the universities could play an important role here, where the nutrition department as well as clinical medicine department can join hands together and do a state's metabolic profiling. Where exactly the soil data is there. So based on soil, you can pick up areas where you could have problems in plant. And some plant material, if you can give to nutrition department, and if nutrition department will do that analysis, then you will at least know that from input side where are the problem areas in say Rajasthan or in UP or in Maharashtra. Now once you have localized those, then that is not enough. Then you go back to animals, then randomly select few animals from the area and then do blood profiling. Once you do that, you keep all those three before you, and then you can have a strategy which is state specific and within state areas. But those problems will have to be tackled by nutrition. Okay, treatment is only a temporary solution. It is an ad hoc solution. So long term you'll have to look at it. I'll give you one example. In Sangli, near Sangli, there is a area called Miraj. Miraj is adjacent to Karnataka. It's a Karnataka boundary. And there, I visited, and there was a surgeon who was my student, and he was very proudly showing me that he has treated, done so many surgeries of traumatic reticulitis, diaphragmatic hernia. This is the pica is the problem. This is the problem. I was doing wonderful work. Recovery rate was also good. Lots of cases were coming. He said, every day 4 or 5. Than waiting for animal to have pica and eat foreign body and have this cardiac related problem and come to you, can you not do that? And then I joined with the DHOs in that area, and I said simply we do one thing. We take superphosphate, and this superphosphate we will spray on the feed, on the fodder that people are feeding, and that was sprayed over there. You won't believe me, next year the cases of that hypophosphatemia related these were down very prominently. Now in that Sangli Satara area where I do a lot of work, we used to have number of cases of phosphorus deficiency hemoglobinuria. Now no more. Through feed.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, next question is what is ethno-veterinarian solution for metabolic diseases? Ethno-veterinarian solution.
Ethno-veterinary solution. Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Now for ethno-veterinary solution also, I will, basic founded, chemistry person and biochemistry person, and also a clinician. I would like to, give you forewarning also here. See, number one, ethno-veterinary practice is good when it comes to nutrition, because our those experienced people knew that there are plants which are rich in calcium, there are plants which are rich in phosphorus, plants that are rich in iron, different minerals. So if you have if you have hold of that knowledge, extremely good, you can do that. But when it comes to absorption, when somebody says that I will have a ethno-veterinary formulation, and I will see that this ethno-veterinary formulation is going to correct metritis, then I will ask these questions whether your herb, see, because we know that if I give if I give cellulose, if I give any plant, you ask any nutrition person how rumen will handle it, by burning it into carbon nitrogen, and that is captured by the microbe, and the microbe will be digested. So in ruminants it is the opposite, absorption is indirect. The feed is being absorbed indirectly. So you will have to prove that the active ingredient which you are giving through herb is stable in rumen, and this is the question I always ask, that whether your number one, your active ingredient is stable in rumen, number two, whether it is absorbed through intestine, and after absorption, is it going to the site of action? If you are able to satisfy, let it be any pathy, I am ready to accept. But if there are no such answers, I will always put a question mark.
Okay, sir. The next question is, what treatment should be done if ketosis is in nervous form?
Oh, if ketosis is nervous form, as I have told you, this neurological form is because of acute hypoglycemia. Okay, so I would give 50% dextrose intravenously, 3 to 4 liters along with insulin. Now, administering insulin is important here because with insulin administration, you also ensure that utilization of glucose, where after giving intravenously there is a transitory hyperglycemia, is also there. So partitioning of glucose from blood into the tissues will take place if you give insulin simultaneously. Earlier people used to give chlorhydras, etc., but that is not available currently here. So I don't think there is any other drug required for neurological syndrome, except that you have to give 50% dextrose along with insulin. That will take care of the nervous.
Okay, sir. So next question is, what metabolic issue is the most common reason for down dairy cattle?
Oh.
What metabolic issue is the most common reason for down dairy cattle? This is last question, sir.
Phosphorus deficiency.
Okay, sir.
Even Dr. Bhikani has done a lot of work in Latur area, Nanded area. I have done a lot of work in the western part of the Maharashtra, and we find that phosphorus deficiency is very rampant and it's very chronic. It leads to a lot of weaknesses in the muscles as well as in skeleton, and Downs is because of that. So the strategy, as I have said, for Downs is you give sodium phosphate after 2 hours of calcium. Don't give simultaneous, because if you give calcium and phosphorus, there is a chance of calcium phosphate crystals. Okay, so give a space of 2 hours, 4 hours.
So, Dr. Rashmi,
Right, sir.
should I supplement something?
Sure.
Any question, ma'am? Sure, ma'am. You're welcome.
So as our Honorable Vice Chancellor said that nutritionists have to read the mindset of clinician and clinician have to read the mindset of nutritionist. So being a man of production, I also want to supplement that if we want to control this metabolic diseases at farmer's point, at the farm level, then first of all we have to take care of, as sir also said, first we have to take care of the BCS. Body condition score is the must, because it is the indicator of the nutrition, that what level of nutrition is animal is getting. And secondly, initially in the nutrition, first when we were students, DCP-TDN was there, then energy, dietary energy, metabolic energy, and nowadays there is one more concept, dietary cation anion balancing. So it is, I think, much more important to solve this problem, metabolic diseases. If dietary cation, every feed formulation is having their own dietary cation anion balance. So if it is positive, it is cationic, then this creates the body pH basic. So we have to give anionic diet before parturition. We have to just balance more of the anionic ions are there in the diet. If anionic diet is there, it will create acidic pH in the body, and that pH that covers the milk fever or calcium and phosphorus deficiency. It sensitizes the parathyroid receptors and thyroid bone receptors and everything. So we have to sit together, nutritionist and clinician. We have to, because it is a major economic issue. Metabolic diseases are, we can say, it is very, very important and most important from economic point of view. So nutritionists and clinicians, we have to sit together and work more and more on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for your.
I think you are very right. You are very right that there is a concept of DCAD, and with one company called Armor Hammer. I had done some studies for DCAD in small hole system, and there our problem was getting feed and then analyzing becomes too much an issue. So with them what we had done was urine pH.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we determined urine pH, and based on urine pH we knew what is the metabolic status of the animal. And based on that, you can supplement, whether you would like to give, a negative, cationic or anionic diet.
No, sir. Beauty of the today's webinar is that our knowledge partner is also with us.
Yeah.
Intas is also with us. So jointly we can do some good work.
That's right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam, for supplementation. Please, now I invite Dr. Rasmi Singh for vote of thanks. One information for the participants. The whole presentation will be available on the VIPM website as well as the Facebook page of the VIPM also. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Rasmi Singh is invited for vote of thanks, please.
Thank you, sir. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all have been immensely benefited by the thought shared by the eminent speaker, Professor Dr. A. Samat. Let me take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending this webinar and making it a grand success. On behalf of VIPM, I am highly thankful to today's chief guest, Professor Vishnu Sharma, Honorable Vice Chancellor Rajivas, Bikaner. Sir, we feel indebted for your precious time you have taken out for us from your busy schedule. Address of Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, had set the tone for this webinar. I sincerely thank you, sir, for your gracious presence and kind words. I am very grateful to today's speaker, Professor Dr. A. Samat, former Dean, Faculty Director Instructions, MAFSU Nagpur, for delivering eminent lecture. Heartiest thank you to sir. Thank you, sir. I am thankful to our patron, Founder Vice Chancellor of Rajivas and member, Governor Advisory Board Rajasthan, respected Professor Dr. Colonel A.K. Gehlot, for his kind words, which are shared by Dr. Meena, because he is busy some other important meeting. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by very sincere and dedicated president of our society, Dr. A.U. Bikane, who guided the team. Thank you, sir. I would be failing in my duties if I do not mention the name of Professor Dr. Sanjita Sharma, Dean PGI. Thank you, ma'am, for your support and guidance. I would like to express my sincere thanks to General Secretary of the Society, Dr. Ashok Kumar sir, for gracing the occasion and his relentless support. A sincere thanks to Chief Organizing Secretary, Dr. D.S. Meena, Head Department of Veterinary Medicine. Thank you, sir, for guiding and encouraging for this webinar. A heartfelt thanks to core committee members, Dr. S.K. Rawal, Dr. Nilesh Sharma, Dr. Mukesh Kumar Srivastava, Dr. M.F. Siddiqui, Dr. M.K. Gupta. I must mention name of my web team for perfect web support. I extend my sincere thanks to Intas Animal Health, in person Dr. Nitin Bhatia, and thanks to Dr. Nilesh Sindhu and Dr. Sudhir Mehta, who have an important role in web support. Last but not the least, I am extremely thankful to our valuable participants. Without their participation, this webinar would not be a success. Once again, thank you to one and all for valuable participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asma. Thanks to all. Thank you, Dean ma'am, especially Dean ma'am, you have taken